In the world of professional wrestling, there are performers who thrill audiences with their unmatched skills and charisma. But then, there are names that send chills down people's spines, not because of what they did in the ring, but because of the dark truths hidden behind the curtain. From real-life controversies to unresolved mysteries, these are 10 wrestlers considered among the most disturbing of all time. Individuals who shocked the wrestling world and raised serious questions about morality. Number 10. Dynamite Kid, from in-ring legend to a deeply troubled man behind the scenes. Dynamite Kid, real name Tom Billington, was once admired for his aggressive and innovative wrestling style. He inspired an entire generation of wrestlers, including Chris Benoit. But behind the bright lights, Dynamite's true self was far from heroic. One of the most chilling stories about him is how he reportedly used to wake up his wife by pointing a firearm at her face every morning. He once said, "One day, this gun's going to have bullets in it." That's not a twisted joke, it's a direct threat. Domestic violence appeared to be a regular part of his life, leaving his wife in a constant state of fear. It doesn't stop there. At one point, Dynamite was said to have injected steroids into a dog. To this day, no one knows exactly why he did it, but the act itself is deeply disturbing. It wasn't just inhumane, it reflected a shocking disregard for life and morality. In the locker room, Dynamite had a reputation as a notorious bully. He was known for tormenting young wrestlers under the excuse of breaking them in. But what he called tradition was clearly just a way to satisfy his own cruel tendencies. Though once seen as a technical genius in the ring, Dynamite Kid serves as a harsh reminder that talent can never excuse terrible behavior. He wasn't just a tough wrestler, he was, in many ways, a dangerous person. Number 9. New Jack, the unhinged rebel with a dangerous mindset. New Jack wasn't just a hardcore wrestling icon, he was chaos personified. He once claimed to have worked as a bounty hunter in real life and said he had been involved in 4 fatal encounters, which he described as justified. Some believe these statements were exaggerated for shock value, but the truth is, we weren't there. And anyone who insists they saw it happen probably isn't being honest. What we do know is that New Jack was legitimately terrifying. He was often accused of attacking people with dangerous weapons, not only during matches, but backstage as well. For him, there was no clear line between performance and reality. Violence wasn't just part of the show, it was part of who he was. One of the most infamous incidents was when he assaulted 17-year-old Eric Koulis during a match. Eric was a young trainee trying to learn the ropes, but he ended up the victim of an uncontrolled outburst. New Jack hit him so hard and so often that Eric's face was left covered in blood. He collapsed in the ring while his father screamed in horror from the sidelines. That moment became one of the most controversial and unforgettable events in wrestling history. With a history of violent behavior, shocking statements, and deeply troubling actions, New Jack was more than just an on-screen villain, he was a real-life nightmare. Number 8. Invader 1, the man who walked away from wrestling's most shocking incident. At number 8 is Invader 1, a major name in Puerto Rican wrestling, and the central figure in one of the darkest moments in the sport's history. He's the man who fatally stabbed wrestling legend Bruiser Brody in the locker room of an arena in 1988. The incident happened backstage, with no cameras and few direct witnesses. Still, most people present that night firmly believed Invader 1 was responsible. Yet when the case went to trial, he was acquitted. Why? There wasn't enough physical evidence. Key witnesses from the U.S. couldn't make it to testify in time, and the legal system was chaotic and full of loopholes. As a result, he walked out of court a free man. The American wrestling community was outraged. Many were heartbroken and furious, immediately calling for a boycott of wrestling shows in Puerto Rico. No one wanted to work in a place where a fellow performer could be killed without consequences. But over time, reality set in. Wrestling is still a job, and Puerto Rico continued to offer high pay. Loyalty to Brody was one thing, but money was another. And before long, several wrestlers who had once sworn never to return quietly appeared back in Puerto Rican rings, where the tragedy had taken place. Invader 1 never faced true consequences for what happened. Yet to many, he remains the man who walked away from a tragedy everyone remembers, and one that many believe should have ended differently. Number 7. Jimmy Superfly Snuka, a legacy stained by tragedy and doubt. Jimmy Superfly Snuka was once one of the brightest stars in professional wrestling. Known for his high-flying style, especially his iconic top rope splash, he became a household name and a fan favorite across the world. But outside the ring, his story took a much darker turn. In 1983, Snuka's girlfriend, 23-year-old Nancy Argentino, was found unconscious in a hotel room. She died shortly after from a traumatic brain injury. Her body also showed suspicious bruising, leading investigators to question whether this was truly an accident. Snuka was the only person with her at the time. However, no charges were filed, and the case gradually faded from public attention. It wasn't until 2015, over 30 years later, that the case was reopened. Snuka was charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. But by 2017, a judge ruled that he was no longer mentally fit to stand trial due to severe health issues, including dementia. Just weeks later, he passed away at age 73 from cancer. Snuka was once a hero in the wrestling world, but the shadow of the 1983 case forever altered his legacy. WWE even removed all references to him from their system at one point. Though they were later restored, the stain on his reputation remained. His story stands as a somber chapter in wrestling history, tied to a man who was once celebrated as a legend. Number 6. Hardbody Harrison. From wrestler to ruthless manipulator. In the world of WWE, Hardbody Harrison was never a household name, but he still managed to leave a mark. With his chiseled physique, intense in-ring style, and background as a U.S. military veteran, he showed promise, even if he never quite reached the top of the wrestling world. But it was only after stepping away from the spotlight that his disturbing true nature began to emerge. Far from being just a washed-up wrestler, Harrison operated a cruel and calculated scheme that preyed on vulnerable women. Posing as a wrestling trainer, he lured young women with the promise of opportunity, only to trap them in a horrifying web of coercion and abuse. Court testimonies revealed how he manipulated his victims mentally, confined them physically, and subjected them to unthinkable levels of exploitation. In 2008, after a lengthy investigation, Harrison was sentenced to life in prison for human trafficking and multiple counts of sexual assault. His case sent shockwaves through the wrestling community, serving as a grim reminder that the most terrifying monsters aren't always the ones wearing masks in the ring. Sometimes, their real faces are far more frightening. Number 5. Donovan Rudd. From the ring to a life behind bars. Brian McGee, who once trained as a developmental wrestler within WWE's system, shocked the wrestling world in July 2013 when he was convicted in a serious criminal case. According to law enforcement reports, McGee went to his ex-girlfriend's residence, where an argument escalated into a violent act that tragically ended her life. The incident happened at an apartment complex in Tampa, Florida, and several witnesses were present. After fleeing the scene, McGee led police on a pursuit through multiple roads before being apprehended following a car crash. During the escape, he reportedly confessed to the act over the phone to family members and later confirmed it to authorities. Adding to the shock, McGee had posted a disturbing image on social media around the time of the incident, which made the case even more alarming. Following an investigation and trial, McGee was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Once considered a rising prospect in professional wrestling, McGee ultimately became a cautionary tale of a life completely derailed outside the ring. Number 4. Grizzly Smith, the unforgivable dark side of a wrestling icon. Aurelian Grizzly Smith was once seen as a major figure in the golden age of American wrestling. Prominent throughout the 1960s and 70s, he stood out not just for his massive frame and powerful in-ring style, but also for his behind-the-scenes roles after retirement. He worked with major promotions, including WWE, in talent development and management. However, beyond the spotlight was a deeply troubling personal history that only came to light many years later. The truth began to surface when his own children, Jake the Snake Roberts, Rockin' Robin, and Sam Houston, publicly shared their painful childhood experiences in several well-known documentaries. Their revelations shocked audiences. They described growing up in an unsafe, emotionally distant environment, filled with psychological trauma. Grizzly was accused of failing to protect his children, not only as a provider but as a parent, creating a household marked by fear and instability. Jake Roberts later said that the emotional wounds inflicted by his father were a driving force behind his long battles with addiction, depression, and self-destruction throughout his career. One of the most haunting chapters tied to Grizzly Smith is the unexplained disappearance of his eldest daughter, Jo Lynn, in 1979. Her whereabouts remain unknown to this day. Although no formal charges were filed, the cloud of suspicion has never fully lifted. There were also ongoing concerns about Grizzly's frequent unsupervised interactions with young people in the wrestling scene. While he was never prosecuted, the questionable nature of these actions left a permanent mark on his legacy. What he left behind wasn't a legacy of glory in the ring, but a painful reminder of how unseen trauma can quietly damage an entire generation. Grizzly Smith, a name that, once spoken, continues to send a chill down the spine. Number 3. Chris Benoit, a tragic ending to a storied career. In the third spot is Chris Benoit, a name that shook the wrestling world not because of championships or in-ring accomplishments, but because of the horrifying events in his final days. Many might argue he should top this list, and it's understandable. What happened was beyond belief. He took the lives of his wife and young son before ending his own. Some refused to believe it. Their first reaction was denial. There's no way. Benoit was one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. He couldn't have done that. Others turned to conspiracy theories, claiming it was all a setup. But no matter how hard it is to accept, the truth remains. Chris Benoit did, in fact, commit those acts. The investigation, the evidence, and the crime scene all pointed to the same conclusion. Though he was once celebrated as a dedicated performer, respected by peers and loved by fans, everything collapsed in just a few tragic days. His name was erased from WWE's history, and Chris Benoit became an unspoken term in the wrestling industry. He went from hero to the center of one of wrestling's darkest moments, and the most chilling part is this: no matter how talented someone may be, terrible actions cannot be overlooked. Number 2. Jimmy Seville, a double life behind a charitable smile. If you're not from the UK, you may have never heard the name Jimmy Seville. But for many in Britain, it brings back memories of one of the darkest and most shameful chapters in modern pop culture. Seville was once a beloved DJ, a popular TV host, and even a national symbol of charity. For decades, he was seen as a public hero. But it was all a facade. After his death, horrifying truths slowly came to light, shocking both the nation and the world. Hundreds of allegations surfaced, and piece by piece, the world realized that Jimmy Seville wasn't just a celebrity. He had led a deeply disturbing double life and is now widely regarded as one of the most notorious offenders in UK history. He lived in plain sight, barely hiding his eccentric appearance or odd behavior. With his outlandish clothes and strange personality, he looked like someone people might avoid, yet ironically, he was celebrated and trusted at the highest levels of society. Few know that outside of his media career, Seville also stepped into the wrestling ring a few times in the 1960s. But he left no real impact as a wrestler. His matches were awkward and forgettable. What people do remember, however, is the legacy of deception and betrayal he left behind. Once a figure at the peak of public admiration, Seville is now remembered only as a symbol of broken trust. Number 1. Ladama del Sencio, when the mask couldn't hide the horror. At the top of this list, and perhaps the most chilling name of all, is Ladama del Sencio. I'm not entirely sure I'm pronouncing it right, but hey, at least I tried. And in this case, trying is already a lot, especially when talking about someone like her. Ladama del Sencio was once a professional wrestler in Mexico. She wore the classic lucha libre mask and stepped into the ring with colorful flair, yet no one could have guessed what lay behind that mask. Because she wasn't just a wrestler, she was also a serial killer. Yes, a convicted serial killer, and not just any kind. She was found guilty of a series of horrifying crimes, mostly targeting elderly people who lived alone. Disguising herself as a social worker, she gained their trust, and then struck. Quietly. Methodically. Without mercy. Just like her name, the Lady of Silence. She's now serving a prison sentence so long it stretches beyond the average human lifespan, more than 700 years. That alone is why her name tops this list. Behind the spotlight and glory lie chilling truths that few dare to confront. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Wrestling Sphere, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the most shocking stories from the world of professional wrestling.